Hello and welcome back. Today we are continuing to talk about John Owen's book, Communion with God. We are in part 1, chapter 3. We're focusing on the love of God, God the Father, our communion with God the Father. And what we want to focus on in this part, in this video, is the fact that we must receive God's love. God is loving. God shows his love. He communicates love toward us. We must receive that love. And when Owen talks about receiving God's love, what he's saying is that God's love is communicated to us through Jesus, and then we receive that love by faith. That's one of the most central and basic facts to our faith. We're saved by faith, justified by faith. But for Owen, faith is not just an assent to facts, like do you agree that Jesus was born and do you believe that he died on the cross? Do you believe that he rose again? Not just, do you think that really happened? Clearly we ought to think that really happened, but it's not merely that. Faith is a beholding the glory of God, beholding the glory of Christ, and seeing God's love. There's something that we don't just see the facts, but we are affected by the facts. And he points to 1 Peter 1:21. Through him are believers in God, who raised him from the dead and gave him glory, so that your faith and hope are in God. Again, what Owen wants us to see is that Jesus was given glory, and there's glory of God seen in the work of redemption, and we are to see that glory. Right? Our ability to love God really hinges on our ability to behold his glory, to actually say, yes, I get his love. I grasp the fact because I see how glorious God is and how wonderful he is and how wonderful this salvation is. And so he compares then Jesus' role in this as sort of like looking at the beams of light that come from the sun. Right? And what do we think about those beams of light? Well, when you look at a beam of light, perhaps you see it sort of shining through the trees and just toward the ground. You see a beam of light, and there you see the beam. You don't actually see the sun. You're not looking at the sun. No, you're looking at the beam. Now, were you to come alongside the beam and to trace that beam back up, you would see the sun. And that's the way that Owen says we should think about Jesus. When we look at Jesus, we're just looking at the beam. We're not looking at the Father, but we're seeing the Father's love being shown down upon us. And if we look at Jesus and we come alongside Jesus and trace Jesus and what Jesus did for our salvation back up, we will see the Father and we will see the love of the Father. And so we are meant not merely to look at Jesus, though we must look at Jesus. And we must by faith embrace Jesus and be united to Jesus by faith. But we must also not merely look at Jesus, but see that Jesus, the source of Jesus coming to save us from our sins, was the Father who loved us and sent his Son. And again, what Owen is about in this section is we have to know that the Father loves us. And we have our fellowship with the Father because we are convinced that he does love us. And so he explains it this way. This is the will of God, that he may always be eyed as benign, kind, tender, loving, and unchangeable. And that peculiarly as the Father, as the great fountain and spring of all gracious communications and fruits of love, this is that which Christ came to reveal. So again, we need to recognize that God is loving, that he is kind, that he is tender. Do you believe these things about the Father, that he is kind and tender and loving? And so Jesus came to show us just how kind, tender, and loving the Father is. And again, you will be helped to have fellowship with the Father when you consider just how kind and tender he truly is. Again, in this way, then, the soul is brought to faith, right? We see how lovely he is. We see how loving he is. We see how kind he is. And when we see all of that, we feel his love. And we long to love him right back. And so Owen describes it this way. Faith, then, is a comfortable persuasion and spiritual perception and sense of his love. And there we repose and rest itself. or we rest ourselves. So notice some words here I just want to highlight before we close here. That we are persuaded that God is love. We're not just told this is the fact, believe. Just say it. God is love, right? Say it. No. We are persuaded. We perceive his love. We have a real sense of the love of God for us. When we think about Jesus, when we meditate on the cross, on his death, his burial, his resurrection, we are overwhelmed with a true sense of the love of God. And now we want to rest in God. We want to repose, to rely on him entirely. This is what faith is, right? It's a beholding, a grasping, an apprehending of the love of God for us, and then we turn and we rest in him. We trust, we rely on him completely, and again, ultimately, we love him in response. This is what saving faith is. And this is how we have fellowship with him, a real sense of his love for us and our proper response of a real love to him right back as we are resting in him.